Well, good morning. This is Barry Odell with the Church of Christ at Mammoth Spring Facebook page. Hope everybody's doing well today. It is Thursday morning, March the 11th, 2021. Had an unexpected issue with my PowerPoint, so I had to do a little work there before I got started. All right. We are ready for Daniel. No, we did Daniel chapter 8 yesterday. Well, I'll tell you what. Let me just shut this down here. I had an unexpected issue with my PowerPoint, so I'm just going to close that out. I don't know what the deal is there. We did Daniel 8 yesterday. We are ready for Daniel chapter 5 this morning. Good morning, Brian and Gail, Diana, and Diana. You have an appointment. All right, well, good to have everybody here today. Others who are not commenting, I see that I don't know who you are, but I see others are on the stream. I don't have access to that for some reason. But anyway, glad to have you. Hey, Joni, good to see you this morning. Daniel chapter 5. This is a straightforward historical account, and we've so far dealt with some things that are prophetic, looking off into the future. And I guess to some extent what we look at here in Daniel chapter 5 is a future event, but it happens very quickly. Hey, Charles, good to see you. In the lifetime of Belshazzar. So we've discussed at length the chronology of Daniel, and today, as we look into chapter 5, we're continuing that. Nebuchadnezzar is passed. There have been a couple of kings between Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar. You'll remember Daniel 7 is the first year of Belshazzar. Daniel 8 is the third year of Belshazzar. Daniel 5 records his death. And there are a lot of different opinions on these Babylonian kings. You can Google it and you'll see a couple of different ideas with them. Good morning, Connie. Good morning, Lyle. It's interesting history. I've shared some things with you about the prophecies specifically regarding Antiochus Epiphanes, Greece and Medo-Persia, these things that we've looked at. I've shared those articles, those links on our on our public Facebook page, so you have access to all of that information. Interesting stuff to look into. But today in Daniel chapter 5, we're looking at a historical count, the transition, and of course we understand that these transitions of kings and kingdoms are not one day or simple overnight events. Persia, the Medes and the Persians are in the process of becoming the dominant world empire. Babylon has been in that seat, if you will, for some time. With Belshazzar, that's getting ready to end. He is the last king of the world empire that we know as Babylon. So here in Daniel chapter 5, the first 4 verses, we are introduced to the events that are taking place. Belshazzar throws a feast. And at this feast, it's for 1,000 of his lords, according to verse 1. They drink wine in the presence of the 1,000. And the wine that they're drinking, as you read these first 4 verses here, you notice Belshazzar gives the commandment to bring the gold and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple which had been in Jerusalem. And of course we read about that in Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 and 2, where Nebuchadnezzar besieges Jerusalem, destroys it, kills a lot of people, takes a lot of captives, but also takes the spoils of war. And part of the spoils were the valuables from the temple of Jerusalem, God's temple. All right, those instruments were sanctified for use in God's temple, for the services of the Levites, for the services of God. Well, Belshazzar now is insulting, in fact, blaspheming, if you will, the God of heaven by using the vessels that were intended for his service in this feast for his gods. Notice here verse 3. Then they brought the gold vessels that had been taken from the temple of the house of God, which had been in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives and his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze and iron, wood and stone. So this is, now again, you think of it, you've got Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Jewish captives. They serve in the king's court. They may have been an eyewitness to this. These guys are using our God's stuff in honor to their gods. beginning in verse 5 here, there are going to be consequences for this. There's no question about that. In the same hour, the fingers of a man's hand appeared and wrote opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. That's interesting. He didn't just see the writing. He saw the hand that wrote. And I can't help but think of, again, going back to Daniel chapter 2 with Nebuchadnezzar and the dream that he had. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar had the dream of that great image, and one part of that dream was a stone was cut out of a mountain without hands. Well, now here, his grandson Belshazzar, hey Sheila, his grandson Belshazzar sees this writing on the wall, but he actually sees the part of the hand that does the writing. That's just something I picked up on as I was reading the text. Then the king's countenance, the New King James says, changed. It became his being disturbed was visible when he saw this. His thoughts troubled him so that, listen to this, so that the joints of his hips were loosened and his knees knocked against each other. This guy was terrified by what he saw. So the first thing he does, the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, soothsayers, just like his predecessor Nebuchadnezzar had done when he had that vision. And of course, Daniel was the one who came and interpreted it. So we keep reading. If you guys tell me what this means, here's going to be the reward for all of this. He's greatly troubled, verse 9. You get to verse 10. The queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, came to the banquet hall. O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts trouble you, nor let your countenance change. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And again, hey mom, we see this phrase throughout Daniel. And if you're looking at a King James or a New King James version, it says the spirit of the holy God. And again, I'm looking here at a New King James, and spirit is capitalized, and holy and God are both capitalized. And that's just incorrect. And the King James does the same thing. These people do not believe in the holy God, Jehovah. When you go back to verse 4, they're celebrating, they're honoring their gods of gold and silver, bronze and iron, wood, and so they don't. These guys are not monotheists. They don't believe in one God. They believe in many gods. And so his queen says, there is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. They remember Daniel. This is some time after the Nebuchadnezzar event, probably around 20 years or so after Nebuchadnezzar. And she remembers this. In the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom like the wisdom of the gods were found in him. And she reminds him of what happened with Nebuchadnezzar. And so Daniel was brought in before the king, beginning in verse 13. I've heard, verse 14, that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. My guys couldn't do it. Daniel, tell me what this means. I'll reward you. You go down to verse 16. If you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around your neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Daniel has the miraculous ability to not only interpret dreams, but to translate what was written on the wall here. And he'll be rewarded for that, it says. But I like his response here. Look at Daniel 5 and verse 17. Keep your gifts, keep your rewards, give to somebody else. But I'll tell you what it says. Daniel's not seeking a higher position in the kingdom. He's not seeking wealth and recognition throughout, whether he's interpreting Nebuchadnezzar's first dream, whether he's dealing with his own visions that he had, or now with Belshazzar. Daniel remains humble. He finds favor among those in Babylon, but also he'll find it with the Persians who take over after Daniel. He's a I guess I would say a unique and a uniquely strong individual. Daniel is. I'll read the writing to the king and make known him to him the interpretation. And he, just like the queen did, Daniel reminds him of something here. O thou most O king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father a kingdom and majesty, glory, and honor, and because of the majesty that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whomever he wished, he executed. Remember, when Nebuchadnezzar had that dream, again recorded in Daniel chapter 2, he called his magicians, astrologers, and sorcerers, and the Chaldeans and said, if you don't do this, I'm going to cut you in pieces and burn your houses down. So Daniel remembers that. He executed whoever he wanted to. Whomever he wished, he kept alive. Whomever he wished, he set up, and whomever he wished, he put down. So Daniel recognizes the authority of these kings and the power that they had. But when his heart was lifted up, verse 20, and his spirit was hardened in pride, there's no doubt that Daniel, particularly when we read, let me see here real quick. When we read Daniel chapter 4, Daniel's care for Nebuchadnezzar was evident. He told Nebuchadnezzar, listen, you need to break off your sins. You need to turn towards God if you want to avoid what we're dealing with, again, back in Daniel chapter 4. But he also knew that he was a proud man. Nebuchadnezzar was arrogant, and the same thing is true with Belshazzar here. And he recounts what happened to him that's recorded there in Daniel chapter 4, where Nebuchadnezzar was driven from among men, remember, for 7 times. Whether that was 7 days or weeks, we can't say for 100% certainty. But Nebuchadnezzar was humbled. You read Daniel chapter 4, the last 2 or 3 verses, and you see his humility after that experience. And I love Daniel right here in Daniel 7 and the end of verse 21. Until he knew that the Most High God rules in the kingdom of men and appoints over it whomever he chooses. There you go. God's in control. But you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, although you knew all this. And notice how Daniel says that. Although you knew all this. So I just wrote in the margin of my Bible right there next to verse 22, those who ignore the past are doomed to repeat it. And that's certainly the case here with Belshazzar and what happened with Nebuchadnezzar. David, gold chain around your neck sounds like the modern pro athlete today. Yeah, and a lot of other people too. Pride, the Bible tells us in Proverbs 6 that pride is one of the 7 things that God hates. He hates it. A proud heart. If you're proud, James tells us, was it James chapter 4? You'll be humbled. So Belshazzar didn't learn his lesson. You've lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven, verse 23. They have brought the vessel, and here's what Daniel hits on specifically in this context. They have brought the vessels of his house before you, and you and your lords, your wives, and your concubines have drunk wine from them, and have praised the gods of silver, gold, bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see or hear or know. Throughout this book, Daniel, obviously he knows, but he also experiences God's wisdom, God's knowledge and power, but he relays that to those to whom he communicates, whether it's Nebuchadnezzar or Belshazzar or Darius. He lets them know who's in charge, and it's not them. It's this God of heaven that he's talking about. And then you have the end of verse 23. And the God who holds your breath in his hand and owns all your ways, you have not glorified. Listen to that. The God who holds your breath in his hand. I immediately thought of Acts 17 and verse 28 where, Paul was in Athens and he's speaking to those idolaters. And he says, in him, that is in God, we live and move and have our being. God who from one blood created all nations of men to dwell together on the earth. That's the same God that we're reading about here in Daniel chapter 7. Then the fingers of the hand were sent from him, and this writing was written. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin, verse 25. And here's the interpretation of that dream. Mene, God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and they clothed Daniel with purple and put a chain of gold around his neck and made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. So, hey, at least Belshazzar was a man of his word. But that phrase there in verse 27, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. When I read that, I thought of this passage here, Leviticus chapter 19, verses 35 and 36. Listen to this. This is a law given to the Israelites. You shall do no injustice in judgment, in measurement of length, weight, or volume. You shall have honest scales, honest weights, an honest ephah, and an honest hin. God weighs this guy in the balances, and he's lacking. And God doesn't have scales that are off. He measures precisely. And your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. And again, this is that transition, which we can even look at in secular history. We can leave the Bible out of this discussion, which to me, as I study the book of Daniel personally, and hopefully I've relayed this to you through these videos, the book of Daniel and its precision, its attention to detail and all these prophecies, which we're going to continue to cover as we proceed through the studies, is one of the strongest arguments for the inspiration of the Scriptures that there is. Predictive prophecy is an extremely important study to understand and to help us understand the inspiration of the Bible. That very night, verse 30, Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. Notice the detail. You've got the names, of course, of the kings. You've got the names of the kingdoms, Chaldea, Babylon, the Medes and the Persians, but he's 62 years old, Darius is, when he takes over. Let me see what this is about. I've got a note here in the margin of my Bible for Jeremiah chapter 27. Let me look at this real quick. It's got to mean something if it's written next to that verse. Okay, yeah. Jeremiah 27, verses 6 and 7. The prophet talking to Israel. And now I have given all these lands into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, my servant. And the beasts of the field I also have given to serve him. So all nations shall serve him and his son and his son's son until the time of his land comes. And then many nations and great kings shall make him serve them. So that's prophetic of what we're reading here in the book of Daniel. It's just amazing to notice all these, again, very specific, detailed prophecies that we can leave, and I hope you understand what I mean when I say this, leave the Bible out of the discussion and just go into secular history and see the fulfillment. I think you know what I mean. It's so important to understand that and appreciate the veracity, the authenticity of these accounts that we're reading. The book of Daniel, so that's it, guys. That's Daniel chapter 5. The book of Daniel it should not be limited to a children's Bible class or a vacation Bible school telling kids about Daniel being thrown into a lion's den. Now, don't misunderstand me. Those are great lessons of courage and faithfulness and boldness and things like this. But, we as adults, people who have been studying the Bible for years, the book of Daniel is so rich and valuable to our faith because of things like, his faith and his courage and his boldness, but also deeper things that we can grasp perhaps better than children can. The inspiration of Scriptures, the value of knowing predictive prophecy, whether we're looking at Babylon being turned over to the Medes and the Persians, or the transitions of the kings, or even looking into, as we're going to look in Daniel chapter 11, the specificity even of some prophecies in Daniel 11 that go into the intertestament period, the period that's between Malachi and Matthew. It's just amazing to study the book of Daniel. All right, guys, that is what I have for today. Daniel chapter 5. And it's Thursday, so we won't be live tomorrow. It's Friday. I don't usually go live on Fridays. So we will pick up, Lord willing, Daniel chapter 6 on Monday. I won't be here Sunday. I start a gospel meeting at the Washington Avenue Church of Christ in Jonesboro on Yeah, on Sunday. I go Sunday through Wednesday. Of course, that's where my friend Aaron Dodson preaches, and many of you who are on here know Aaron through the We Talk Truth group and through the things that he does here on Facebook. I'm looking forward to being in that meeting. I'll be there Monday through Wednesday. But I'll be here Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday morning to do this, and then when I finish my live streams, I'll head down to Jonesboro. But anyway, appreciate y'all being on here today. As always, if you have any further questions or comments, use the comment section here. Send me a private message. I'll respond to you. I guess that's all. All right, guys. Have a good day. Have a good weekend. And we will see you on the next video.